The genealogy, or the family tree of Jesus, as recorded in the Gospel of Matthew and contextualized in the Hebrew Scriptures, begins with Abraham, a central figure in Israelite, Jewish, and Christian traditions. Abraham, originally named Abram, is introduced in biblical records as living in the city of Ur of the Chaldeans, a major urban center in southern Mesopotamia, which corresponds to modern-day southern Iraq, during the early 2nd millennium BC, traditionally dated around 2000 BC. The Mesopotamian city-states of this period were characterized by structured societies with established legal codes, trade networks, and religious practices centered on polytheistic worship. Abraham's upbringing within this context would have exposed him to complex social and religious structures. Although the biblical record emphasizes his departure from these customs to follow a monotheistic covenant with God, Abraham's narrative as preserved in the book of Genesis positions him as the recipient of a divine covenant, establishing him as the progenitor of a lineage intended to produce a singular line through which God's promises would be realized. The covenant, explicitly articulated in Genesis 12 verses 1 to 3, included a directive to leave his native land, a promise of descendants as numerous as the stars, and a guarantee that through him all nations of the world would be blessed. This covenant forms the theological foundation for Jesus' genealogical significance, as it situates Abraham as the initial patriarch within a lineage specifically designated for the fulfillment of messianic prophecy. Abraham's migration from Ur, according to biblical chronology, took him through Haran, located in the northern regions of Mesopotamia, corresponding to present-day southeastern Turkey. The movement from Ur to Haran and subsequently to Canaan represents not only a physical journey, but also a socio-cultural transition from established urban Mesopotamian society to a nomadic lifestyle in a less urbanized, agriculturally varied region. The biblical account situates Abraham as responding to divine instruction, demonstrating obedience to God's directive to relocate his household, which included his father Terah, his wife Sarai, and his household servants. The historical plausibility of this migration is reinforced by archaeological and textual evidence regarding regional trade routes, familial migration patterns, and settlement trends in the ancient Near East during this period. Upon arrival in the land of Canaan, Abraham settled in areas corresponding to the hill country near Shechem and Bethel. The biblical record notes that God appeared to Abraham in these regions, reiterating the promise of land, descendants, and blessing. This covenantal interaction establishes the territorial and familial context in which Abraham's lineage would continue. Abraham's household, though initially limited in size, became the nucleus for a genealogical line that would be traced across subsequent generations, culminating in the birth of Isaac, his son and heir, through whom the messianic promise would continue. Abraham's marriage to Sarai, later renamed Sarah, is central to the continuation of this lineage. Sarah's advanced age, coupled with initial barrenness, is presented in the biblical narrative as an obstacle to the fulfillment of God's promise. The birth of Isaac, when Abraham was 100 years old and Sarah 90, is recorded in Genesis 21 verses 1 to 7 as a direct result of divine intervention, emphasizing the covenantal nature of the lineage rather than natural procreation alone. The narrative positions Isaac not merely as a biological descendant, but as a designated heir of divine promises, establishing the theological significance of his role within the genealogy of Jesus. Isaac's naming, derived from the Hebrew verb to laugh, reflects the initial incredulity of both Abraham and Sarah in response to the announcement of his birth, situating this event within the broader narrative of God's providential orchestration. Isaac's upbringing in Canaan occurs within the context of Abraham's interactions with neighboring groups, including Philistines, Hittites, and Amorites, as documented in Genesis 20-26. These interactions involved land negotiations, treaties, and instances of intergroup tension, providing a socio-political backdrop to Isaac's early life and illustrating the continuity of Abraham's household within a complex regional framework. Abraham's faith and adherence to divine command are further demonstrated through events such as the binding of Isaac, recorded in Genesis 22. In this narrative, Abraham's willingness to offer Isaac as a sacrifice is presented as a test of faith, culminating in divine intervention that prevents the act and reiterates the covenantal promise. Theological interpretation positions Isaac as both a literal and typological figure, prefiguring the ultimate fulfillment of the messianic promise through Jesus. Historically, the narrative reflects common Near Eastern motifs of covenantal obedience, familial sacrifice, and divine reward, reinforcing the centrality of Isaac within the Abrahamic lineage. Isaac's adulthood is marked by marriage to Rebekah, daughter of Bethuel of Padan Aram, further extending the family's connection to northern Mesopotamian regions. The arrangement, as detailed in Genesis 24, illustrates the importance of maintaining genealogical and social continuity within Abraham's line, emphasizing endogamous practices that preserved covenantal inheritance. Isaac's progeny, particularly his twin sons Esau and Jacob, emerge from this marriage, with the biblical record emphasizing Jacob as the continuation of the covenantal line due to divine election, despite the primogeniture of Esau. This selection establishes the theological framework for the eventual Davidic line and, by extension, the genealogy of Jesus. The socio-political environment of Isaac's time, while partially reconstructed from archaeological evidence, reflects the transition from semi-nomadic pastoralism to localized agrarian settlements in Canaan. Land ownership, inheritance practices, and household management form part of the historical context in which Isaac's descendants would continue the covenantal line. Isaac's role as a patriarch includes managing interactions with neighboring communities, resolving disputes over wells and resources, and consolidating familial holdings, situating the biblical narrative within a historically plausible framework of early 2nd millennium BC Canaanite society. Genealogically, the line from Abraham to Isaac is preserved with specific attention to the transmission of covenantal rights. Isaac is designated as the heir to Abraham's covenant, with the promise that through his descendants, the land of Canaan would be inherited and all nations would receive blessing. This inheritance is both legal and theological, reflecting the biblical emphasis on the continuity of divine promise through successive generations. The genealogical record highlights the exclusive transmission of covenantal status through Isaac, distinguishing him from Abraham's other offspring, such as Ishmael, thereby maintaining theological precision. From a historical and pastoral perspective, Abraham's lineage to Isaac establishes the foundational context for subsequent generations. The continuity of the covenant, confirmed through Isaac, ensures that the genealogical trajectory toward David and ultimately Jesus is both divinely orchestrated and historically situated. This segment situates the Abrahamic covenant within broader Near Eastern historical patterns while preserving theological integrity, emphasizing obedience, divine selection, and the structured transmission of covenantal promise. Quantitative details within this lineage, as preserved in the biblical chronology, include Abraham's lifespan of 175 years, the birth of Isaac when Abraham was 100, and the generational interval between Abraham and Isaac spanning approximately a century. Such chronological markers provide a measurable framework for tracing genealogical continuity, establishing a temporal structure that aligns with historical and theological narratives. The inclusion of Rebekah's familial background, the identification of household servants, and references to regional settlements contribute additional contextual detail, ensuring that the historical reconstruction is comprehensive and grounded in available sources. Abraham's interactions with regional polities, including treaties with Canaanite inhabitants and negotiations for burial sites, as in the acquisition of the Cave of Machpelah, further illustrate the integration of Abraham's household into the broader historical and geographical context of Canaan. These events, while primarily theological in purpose, reflect historically plausible practices concerning land ownership, familial burial customs, and regional diplomacy in the early 2nd millennium BC. The biblical record situates Abraham and Isaac within these dynamics, providing continuity between divine promise and human socio-political structures. Isaac's eventual assumption of patriarchal authority following Abraham's death at the age of 175 demonstrates the continuity of governance and familial stewardship. The record emphasizes Isaac's management of household affairs, land, and covenantal responsibilities, reinforcing the theological principle of divinely guided succession. The historical plausibility of Isaac's leadership role is supported by common practices of patrilineal inheritance and domestic governance in ancient Canaanite societies, integrating genealogical narrative with socio-political reality. The genealogy of Jesus continues through Isaac, the son of Abraham, as recorded in the Hebrew Scriptures and elaborated in biblical genealogical frameworks. Isaac's life, situated in the early 2nd millennium BC, corresponds to a period in which the Canaanite city-states and the broader Levantine region experienced semi-nomadic settlement patterns, agricultural development, and interregional trade. Isaac, as the second patriarch of the Abrahamic covenant, inherited the promises given to Abraham, including the assurance that his descendants would become a significant lineage and that through this line, all nations would be blessed. Isaac's early life took place within the land of Canaan, where Abraham had established his household after leaving Mesopotamia. The biblical record situated Isaac near Beer Lahai in the region between Kadesh and Bered, and in proximity to Gerar, which corresponds to territories controlled by Philistine or Amorite polities. These areas were characterized by settlements composed of small agrarian communities with fortified towns and a socio-political system dominated by city elders and local rulers. The economy was primarily based on agriculture, livestock husbandry, and seasonal trade, which formed the backdrop for Isaac's management of his father's inherited holdings. Isaac's marriage to Rebekah, a daughter of Bethuel from Padan Aram in Mesopotamia, illustrates the continuation of strategic familial alliances across geographic and cultural boundaries. The narrative, as detailed in Genesis 24, describes Abraham's servant traveling approximately 600 to 700 kilometers from Canaan to northern Mesopotamia, following established trade, and caravan routes to secure a spouse aligned with the covenantal line. Rebekah's selection was determined by a combination of familial consultation and divine indication, demonstrating the integration of covenantal guidance with social custom. This marriage ensured that the covenantal line maintained connections to Mesopotamian ancestry, reinforcing historical and theological continuity. Isaac and Rebekah's household was structured according to patrilineal inheritance customs prevalent in the ancient Near East. Isaac inherited not only the land promises associated with Abraham, but also the familial authority, including control over livestock, agricultural holdings, and laborers. The biblical text indicates that Isaac engaged in the redigging of Abraham's wells, a process involving both practical engineering and socio-political negotiation with neighboring groups. Wells were crucial assets for sustaining flocks and communities, and disputes over access reflect the interactions between pastoralist households and settled populations. These activities situate Isaac as both a religiously designated heir and a practical patriarch responsible for sustaining the family lineage in a competitive environment. The birth of Isaac's twin sons, Esau and Jacob, represents the continuation of the covenantal lineage and introduces significant elements of divine selection and familial dynamics. Esau, the firstborn, was entitled under customary law to the primary inheritance. However, biblical texts, particularly Genesis 25 verse 23, indicate that divine election favored Jacob, the younger twin, establishing a theological precedence that influenced the subsequent development of Israelite history. This election is central to the genealogy of Jesus, as Jacob becomes the ancestor through whom the covenantal promises are realized, ensuring the continuity of the line leading to Judah, David, and ultimately Jesus. Isaac's relationship with his sons illustrates the interplay between customary inheritance practices and divine mandate. Esau, characterized as skilled in hunting and pastoralism, received a primary birthright. However, Jacob, favoring a more domestically oriented and covenantally conscious lifestyle, ultimately obtained the birthright and the blessing of patriarchal succession. The narrative in Genesis 27 details the transfer of Isaac's blessing, which involved the explicit designation of the covenantal inheritance, conferring authority, material wealth, and divine favor. This process reflects historical practices of primogeniture, which were occasionally subject to negotiation, subversion, or external influence, aligning the genealogical record with the broader socio-cultural context of the ancient Near East. Isaac's interactions with regional polities during his lifetime provide additional historical context for his patriarchal role. Encounters with the Philistine king Abimelech, negotiations over land and water rights, and the settlement of his household near Gerar illustrate the practical governance responsibilities of a patriarch in Canaanite society. The biblical account records that Isaac amassed substantial livestock, servants, and property, reflecting both divine blessing and prudent management. These economic and social details indicate that the covenantal lineage was maintained not only through spiritual mandate, but also through effective household governance, land management, and integration within regional networks. Jacob's early life included episodes that demonstrate the transmission of covenantal responsibility and the functioning of familial hierarchy. The narrative describes Jacob acquiring Esau's birthright through negotiation and later securing Isaac, blessing through structured familial and ritual procedures. These events highlight both continuity and adaptation within the covenantal line, as the mechanisms for maintaining inheritance involved social strategy and compliance with divinely articulated guidance. Jacob's actions, while situated within familial tension, ensured that the covenantal promises continued along the line designated by God, preserving the integrity of the lineage leading to the messianic fulfillment. Following these events, Jacob's flight to Padan Aram reflects socio-political conditions and customary practices regarding inheritance and familial rivalry. The distance from Canaan to Mesopotamia, traversed over approximately 500 to 600 kilometers, required extensive preparation, knowledge of regional trade routes, and engagement with distant kin networks. Jacob's time in Padan Aram, where he entered the household of Laban, involved labor arrangements typical for the period, including service in exchange for marriage, and established social and economic ties that would influence his descendants. These arrangements ensured that Jacob's lineage was reinforced by maternal connections, household alliances, and continuity of genealogical authority, integrating covenantal promises with practical settlement patterns. Jacob's marriages to Leah and Rachel reflect strategic alliances that secured both domestic stability and continuation of the covenantal line. Each marriage produced sons who would become patriarchs of the 12 tribes of Israel, providing both numerical and territorial expansion for the family. The birth order of Jacob's sons, combined with maternal lineage and domestic hierarchy, structured the genealogical record in a manner consistent with cultural norms for inheritance and tribal formation. Historical analysis suggests that household composition, polygyny, and the management of domestic labor were standard practices among semi-nomadic pastoralists in the Levant, situating the biblical narrative within the broader context of 2nd millennium BC Near Eastern societies. The sons of Jacob, particularly Judah, Levi, and Joseph, emerge as central figures in the genealogical narrative leading to Jesus. Judah, designated as the line through which kingship and messianic expectation would be realized, receives early attention in the record, reflecting both the prioritization of covenantal continuity and the preservation of divine selection. Levi's descendants form the priestly class, responsible for maintaining religious observance and legal instruction, while Joseph's line carries both prophetic and practical significance within the migration narrative to Egypt. Each son's historical and theological role integrates with the genealogical structure, establishing both temporal and spiritual continuity. Jacob's return to Canaan, after approximately 20 years in Mesopotamia, consolidates his household and secures territorial claims through negotiation with Esau. This return demonstrates the integration of covenantal fidelity, familial strategy, and regional diplomacy. The settlement patterns established during this period, including the acquisition of land, management of flocks, and establishment of household governance, reflect historically plausible practices of semi-nomadic pastoralist communities in Canaan. Jacob's ability to maintain covenantal promises within these practical constraints situates the genealogy within an empirical historical framework, preserving both theological and temporal continuity. The biblical chronology situates Isaac's lifespan at 180 years, with the birth of Jacob occurring when Isaac was 60 years old. Such chronological markers provide a temporal structure for the transmission of covenantal authority, enabling continuity across generations. The explicit recording of ages, birth events, and generational intervals in the biblical text serves both theological and historical purposes, ensuring clarity in the genealogical record and facilitating the tracing of lineage to subsequent figures such as Judah, David, and ultimately Jesus. Isaac's household, encompassing sons, daughters-in-law, servants, and livestock, operated within a structured system of familial governance consistent with Near Eastern customs. The allocation of resources, oversight of labor, and management of land and flocks ensured that the covenantal lineage was preserved in both biological and social terms. These practices, documented within the biblical record, reinforce the historical plausibility of the genealogical transmission and demonstrate the continuity of covenantal obligations within practical socioeconomic frameworks. Jacob's preparation for eventual leadership within the covenantal line involved strategic engagement with both divine instruction and sociopolitical realities. His management of family relations, negotiation of inheritance rights, and establishment of household stability illustrate the intersection of theological mandate and practical governance. The integration of these elements ensures that the lineage from Isaac to Jacob remains coherent, historically grounded, and consistent with both Near Eastern social practices and the requirements of covenantal fidelity. The transmission of covenantal promise from Isaac to Jacob establishes a stable foundation for subsequent generations, maintaining the integrity of the genealogical line leading to Judah, David, and ultimately Jesus. The combination of divine selection, practical governance, regional settlement, and intergenerational continuity ensures that the biblical record reflects both historical plausibility and theological purpose. Quantitative markers, including lifespans, birth intervals, and territorial movements, provide additional structure to the genealogy, ensuring precise continuity and historical alignment. The family tree leading to Jesus continues through Jacob, later named Israel, whose 12 sons became the patriarchs of the 12 tribes of Israel. The narrative from Jacob to Judah provides both historical and theological context, detailing the consolidation of the covenantal lineage, familial governance, and integration into the socio-political environment of ancient Canaan and Egypt. Jacob's life represents a transitional period in which the covenant established with Abraham and passed through Isaac is preserved and directed toward the lineage that will produce the royal house of Judah, culminating centuries later in the Davidic monarchy. Jacob's familial structure was complex, composed of multiple wives and concubines, reflecting the polygynous practices common among semi-nomadic Levantine households during the 2nd millennium BC. His primary wives, Leah and Rachel, daughters of Laban from Padan Aram, as well as their maidservants Bilhah and Zilpah, provided the maternal lineage for his 12 sons. These sons were Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Dan, Naphtali, Gad, Asher, Issachar, Zebulun, Joseph, and Benjamin. Their births occurred over a period corresponding to several decades during Jacob's residence in Padan Aram and subsequent return to Canaan, situating the family within identifiable historical and regional frameworks. The chronological interval between Isaac's death and Jacob's establishment of his household in Canaan spans approximately 80 to 100 years, providing a temporal structure for genealogical continuity. The return of Jacob to Canaan, following his 20-year residence with Laban, involved the relocation of his household and accumulated livestock. This migration covered an estimated 500 kilometers from Padan Aram to the central hill country of Canaan, along established trade and pastoral routes. The migration illustrates both logistical planning and strategic settlement practices of semi-nomadic communities, including the allocation of resources, management of labor, and coordination of household movements. Jacob's household integrated into the existing Canaanite socio-political landscape, negotiating territorial claims and access to resources with neighboring inhabitants, consistent with known practices of land use and pastoral management during this period. Within Jacob's family, Judah emerges as a principal figure in the covenantal lineage. Judah, the fourth son of Jacob and Leah, assumes prominence due to both divine designation and practical leadership within the family structure. The biblical record emphasizes Judah's role in mediating disputes among his brothers and facilitating strategic decisions concerning family welfare, trade, and settlement. Judah's position reflects the social expectation for firstborn sons of primary wives to assume leadership responsibilities, while also accommodating the dynamics of divine election that guide the genealogical trajectory toward the Davidic line. The episode involving Tamar, Judah's daughter-in-law, provides critical insight into the mechanisms of lineage preservation and inheritance within the patriarchal system. According to Genesis 38, Judah's sons Er and Onan died without producing heirs, prompting Tamar to ensure the continuation of the familial line through levirate-like arrangements. Tamar's actions, resulting in the birth of Perez and Zerah, demonstrate the adherence to cultural norms governing inheritance and the transmission of property and covenantal status, while also preserving the genealogical integrity of the lineage. The inclusion of Tamar in the genealogy, despite her non-Israelite associations, underscores the biblical principle of divine providence operating within complex familial circumstances. Judah's descendants, beginning with Perez, form the immediate line through which the royal and messianic promises are transmitted. Perez's integration into the family structure involved established marital and procreative arrangements, consistent with Near Eastern practices of endogamy and household management. Subsequent generations, including Hezron, Ram, Amminadab, Nahshon, and Salmon, maintained both familial authority and covenantal responsibility, ensuring continuity of the line. The genealogical record emphasizes male line succession, with attention to birth order, marital alliances, and tribal affiliations, situating the lineage within a historically plausible framework of patrilineal inheritance. The narrative of Judah and his descendants is situated within the broader historical and geopolitical context of Canaan during the second millennium BC. The region was characterized by fragmented city-states, semi-nomadic pastoralist communities, and sporadic interactions with emerging empires in Mesopotamia and Egypt. Judah's family, while maintaining religious and cultural distinctiveness, participated in trade, livestock management, and territorial negotiation, integrating the covenantal line within the socio-economic realities of the region. These interactions, while not elaborated in extensive archaeological detail, correspond with known patterns of settlement, resource management, and intercommunity relations in the Levant. Levi, Judah's brother, and the descendants of other sons of Jacob contributed to the formation of distinct social and religious roles within Israelite society. Levi's line, designated for priestly and instructional responsibilities, provides context for understanding the distribution of social and spiritual authority among Jacob's sons. Judah's line, in contrast, is prioritized for leadership, kingship, and the realization of messianic expectation, establishing a bifurcation of function that integrates both practical governance and covenantal fulfillment. This division reflects the organizational structure of ancient Israelite tribes and the prioritization of specific households for designated roles in society. The movement of Jacob's household to Egypt, prompted by famine conditions in Canaan, situates Judah's line within an extended historical and geopolitical framework. Jacob's sons, including Judah, engaged with Egyptian authorities through trade and negotiation, ultimately establishing a settlement in Goshen. This relocation, while temporary in duration relative to subsequent Egyptian history, ensured the preservation of the covenantal line under the governance of a regional imperial power. Judah's leadership in coordinating household relocation, resource allocation, and interaction with foreign authorities demonstrates the integration of domestic governance with external political realities, maintaining genealogical continuity under complex conditions. Judah's personal and familial conduct, including management of property, negotiation of marital alliances, and leadership of brothers, illustrates the interplay between cultural norms, legal structures, and divine election. The preservation of the covenantal line required both adherence to established inheritance practices and responsiveness to circumstances that necessitated adaptive strategies, including levirate arrangements, marital negotiations, and strategic relocation. Judah's actions within these frameworks ensured that the line leading to Perez and subsequent descendants remained intact, preserving the theological and historical continuity required for the eventual emergence of the Davidic line. The genealogical sequence from Judah to the kings of Judah, as recorded in biblical texts, proceeds with Perez, Hezron, Ram, Amminadab, Nahshon, Salmon, Boaz, Obed, Jesse, and ultimately David. Each generation is associated with specific territorial, social, and familial responsibilities, reflecting the integration of theological purpose with historical plausibility. The sequence illustrates consistent attention to male line descent, marriage within the household's social network, and adherence to inheritance practices designed to preserve both property and covenantal promise. Judah's placement in this sequence establishes the foundation for the royal trajectory of the line, culminating in the emergence of David as the preeminent Israelite king. Boaz, a descendant of Salmon and Rahab, continues the line through his marriage to Ruth, a Moabite woman, exemplifying the integration of foreign elements into the genealogical sequence while preserving covenantal integrity. The union demonstrates adherence to social and legal practices governing marriage, property rights, and lineage, while accommodating divine selection as a guiding principle. Obed, their son, continues the line, leading to Jesse, who fathers David, the eventual king whose lineage becomes central to messianic expectation. Judah's earlier leadership and procreative contributions directly shaped the genealogical trajectory, situating his line as essential for both historical and theological purposes. The historical context surrounding Judah and his descendants includes interactions with neighboring Canaanite tribes, participation in migratory and settlement patterns, and engagement with agricultural and pastoral economies. Judah's household maintained continuity in land management, resource allocation, and family governance, ensuring that subsequent generations retained both material stability and covenantal legitimacy. These practices, documented implicitly through genealogical recording, align with known customs of Levantine semi-nomadic and early agrarian communities during the second millennium BC. Judah's role in coordinating family strategy, mediating disputes, and maintaining covenantal fidelity integrates practical governance with theological mandate. His actions, including the facilitation of lineage preservation through Tamar, underscore the necessity of adaptive measures within the framework of inherited responsibility. The genealogical record positions Judah as a figure whose leadership ensured both social stability and divine continuity, providing a foundation for the royal and messianic line established in subsequent generations. From a chronological perspective, the interval between Jacob's return to Canaan and Judah's assumption of lineage responsibilities spans several decades, accommodating the births of multiple sons and the establishment of tribal households. The biblical chronology situates Judah as the fourth son of Leah, with Perez and Zerah born approximately 40 years following Jacob's marriages, providing a temporal structure for subsequent generational continuity. These chronological markers enable precise tracing of covenantal succession and support historical plausibility for the lineage leading toward David and Jesus. The genealogical line from Judah to David represents the consolidation of the covenantal lineage within the context of Israelite society during the late second millennium BC. Judah, as a principal son of Jacob, established a line through which the tribal and eventually national leadership of Israel would be realized. His descendants, beginning with Perez and continuing through Hezron, Ram, Amminadab, Nahshon, Salmon, Boaz, Obed, and Jesse, reflect both continuity of covenantal promise and integration into the social and political structures of Canaanite and early Israelite communities. Perez, the firstborn son of Judah and Tamar, became the initial point of lineage continuity. Tamar's arrangement, designed to preserve the family line, aligns with the Levirate customs known among ancient Near Eastern societies, in which the survival of familial property and covenantal inheritance was prioritized. The birth of Zerah alongside Perez reflects customary twin births, and subsequent genealogical notation consistently emphasizes the selection of Perez as the line through which covenantal authority would pass. This focus establishes a pattern in which divine purpose intersects with established social norms to maintain the integrity of the genealogical line. Perez's son Hezron appears in genealogical records as part of the consolidation of the Judahite clan within Canaan. Hezron's lifespan and activities are largely inferred from genealogical and tribal accounts, indicating his role in maintaining household stability, coordinating land and livestock management, and preparing his descendants for leadership within the clan. The Hezron lineage includes coordination of property, oversight of familial labor, and alignment with neighboring clans, situating the genealogical line within the broader socio-political matrix of early Israelite settlement patterns. Hezron's son Ram continues the line, representing a transitional generation in the emergence of Judahite social influence. The genealogical continuity from Ram to Amminadab reflects the establishment of tribal structure and the integration of Judah's descendants into early Canaanite and Israelite settlements. These generations operated within semi-nomadic pastoralist communities, transitioning toward more structured agrarian practices, balancing pastoral and agricultural subsistence. Such integration demonstrates the plausibility of genealogical continuity amid demographic and socioeconomic shifts in the region. Amminadab, the son of Ram, held a lineage position that would later intersect with significant religious and political developments within Israel. Amminadab's family maintained control over local resources, coordinated settlement expansion, and participated in intertribal relations, consistent with historical patterns of clan leadership. His son, Nahshon, emerges as a prominent figure within Israelite tradition, particularly in later accounts of the Exodus, where he is identified as the head of the tribe of Judah. Nahshon's leadership indicates the ongoing role of Judah's descendants in coordinating both religious observance and socio-political administration. Salmon, the son of Nahshon, continues the family tree, integrating intermarriage and regional alliances into the continuity of covenantal inheritance. Salmon's marriage to Rahab, a Canaanite woman from Jericho, reflects historical and socio-cultural practices that allowed strategic integration of foreign lineages into Israelite households while preserving covenantal identity. Rahab's inclusion in the genealogical line demonstrates the theological principle that divine purpose and lineage continuity operate within historically plausible social interactions and marriage customs, emphasizing the preservation of covenantal authority through selected familial connections. The offspring of Salmon and Rahab, Boaz, represents a significant integration of economic, social, and religious dimensions. Boaz is recorded as a landowner and manager of agricultural operations, operating in the region of Bethlehem during the late 2nd millennium BC. The agrarian context includes cultivation of cereals, vineyards, and olive groves, with labor management involving both family members and hired workers. Boaz's marriage to Ruth, a Moabite widow, reflects customary practices for integrating non-Israelite individuals into the covenantal lineage, as well as the strategic maintenance of property and lineage continuity through levirate-like agreements and family contracts. Obed, the son of Boaz and Ruth, inherits both property and covenantal responsibility. Obed's household maintained continuity of agricultural and pastoral operations while preserving the theological and legal framework established by earlier generations. Obed's son, Jesse, further consolidates the Judahite line, assuming responsibilities associated with household management, tribal coordination, and preparation for broader regional leadership. Jesse's household, located in Bethlehem, participated in trade networks, resource distribution, and regional interactions with neighboring clans and settlements, situating the genealogy within a historically verifiable context of socioeconomic and political structures. Jesse's multiple sons, among whom David is the youngest, illustrate the continuity of covenantal selection and divine purpose intersecting with customary inheritance practices. David's emergence as the future king of Israel represents the culmination of Judah's lineage in the consolidation of political, religious, and territorial authority. The selection of David, though youngest, reflects a consistent biblical principle of divine election superseding primogeniture while maintaining genealogical and historical plausibility. David's historical context involves both internal clan structures and broader regional geopolitics. The late 2nd millennium and early 1st millennium BC Levant was characterized by interactions with Canaanite city-states, Philistine settlements, and Egypt. David's early life, including his management of flocks and pastoral responsibilities in Bethlehem, situates him within customary household practices for younger sons not initially designated for leadership. This occupational engagement provided practical skills in resource management, negotiation with local populations, and awareness of territorial and political realities relevant to his later consolidation of power. The narrative of David's anointing by the prophet Samuel, as recorded in biblical texts, situates the selection of David within both divine mandate and tribal context. The ritual selection, though theological in purpose, reflects customary recognition of tribal leaders and emerging political figures within semi-structured Israelite communities. David's identification as a son of Jesse, of the tribe of Judah, ensures the continuity of covenantal promise originating with Abraham, passing through Isaac and Jacob, and consolidating within the Judahite line. The genealogical integrity of this line is critical for the theological and historical validation of David's kingship and, subsequently, the messianic line extending to Jesus. David's consolidation of leadership involved interactions with neighboring groups, including the Philistines and surrounding Canaanite communities. His military, administrative, and economic strategies, as documented in biblical texts, demonstrate the integration of household leadership, tribal governance, and regional diplomacy. These responsibilities reflect historically plausible practices of tribal confederations and semi-state entities in the ancient Levant. David's emergence as a central figure illustrates the intersection of covenantal continuity with socio-political realities, maintaining historical plausibility while reinforcing theological significance. The chronological framework situates David approximately in the early 10th century BC, following the death of Saul, the first king of Israel, and his consolidation of political authority over the southern kingdom of Judah and eventually the United Monarchy. The genealogical record situates David as a direct descendant of Judah through Perez, Hezron, Ram, Amminadab, Nahshon, Salmon, Boaz, Obed, and Jesse, ensuring continuity of covenantal inheritance. Lifespan indicators and generational intervals provide measurable temporal markers for tracing lineage across centuries, maintaining both historical and theological precision. David's household, as patriarch, encompassed numerous wives, concubines, and children, reflecting customary polygynous practices among Israelite and Near Eastern royalty. The management of these domestic and familial structures required coordination of resources, delegation of authority, and maintenance of social hierarchy. David's role in household and tribal governance ensured that covenantal responsibilities were preserved, establishing a stable foundation for succession and continuity of the lineage leading to Jesus. David's significance extends beyond his immediate household to include his political and military administration, territorial expansion, and establishment of Jerusalem as a central administrative and religious site. The relocation of the Ark of the Covenant to Jerusalem and the consolidation of religious functions under his authority reinforced the intertwining of theological mandate and historical practice. David's genealogical and political legacy ensures that the covenantal promises originating with Abraham and Judah were preserved and institutionalized within both familial and national structures. The line from Judah to David demonstrates consistent application of covenantal principle, adherence to social and legal norms regarding inheritance, and integration into the regional socio-political context of Canaan and early Israel. Each generation contributes to the preservation of lineage through marriage alliances, strategic settlement, household governance, and coordination with neighboring groups. The genealogical sequence maintains historical plausibility while establishing theological continuity, directly linking Judah's descendants to the Davidic monarchy and, ultimately, to the Messianic lineage. The family tree from David to Solomon represents the consolidation of the Davidic monarchy, which forms a central foundation in the Messianic lineage leading to Jesus. David, as the youngest son of Jesse and direct descendant of Judah, established a political, religious, and social framework that preserved covenantal continuity, institutionalized Israelite governance, and provided the context for the royal inheritance that Solomon would assume. The line from David to Solomon encompasses the transmission of authority, the codification of dynastic succession, and the integration of both internal and external socio-political structures in the late 10th and early 9th centuries BC. David's ascension to the throne of Israel, following the death of Saul, marked the culmination of Judah's tribal prominence and the consolidation of the united monarchy. His reign, traditionally dated to approximately 1010 to 970 BC, was characterized by territorial expansion, the establishment of Jerusalem as the political and religious capital, and the institutional centralization of religious functions. These measures created a stable environment in which the Davidic line could be preserved and propagated. David's household, encompassing multiple wives, concubines, and children, followed customary polygynous practices, consistent with Near Eastern royal norms, ensuring continuity of lineage through structured domestic management and succession planning. Among David's numerous sons, Solomon emerged as the designated heir. Solomon's mother, Bathsheba, played a central role in both dynastic politics and the preservation of the Davidic covenant. Her influence ensured Solomon's position as successor, despite the presence of older brothers, illustrating the interplay between maternal influence, royal succession norms, and divine mandate as presented in the biblical record. The recognition of Solomon as heir aligns with principles of divine election overriding strict primogeniture, a recurrent theme in the transmission of the covenantal line. This selection preserved the theological continuity from Judah through David, maintaining the line ultimately leading to the messianic expectation. Solomon's birth, positioned historically in the mid-10th century BC, represents both a biological and dynastic continuation of David's line. His early life involved education and preparation within the royal household, exposure to administrative and religious practices, and participation in the management of territorial holdings. The royal household maintained control over urban centers, agricultural estates, and pastoral lands distributed across the tribal regions, integrating Solomon's upbringing into the operational framework of the united monarchy. These practices ensured that Solomon's inheritance encompassed both material resources and covenantal authority, providing the foundation for his subsequent role as king. Upon David's death, Solomon assumed the throne in approximately 970 BC, consolidating political authority over the United Kingdom of Israel. His succession involved coordination with tribal leaders, priestly authorities, and regional administrators, reflecting historically plausible governance practices. Solomon's reign, traditionally dated to 970 to 931 BC, is associated with territorial expansion, economic development, and religious institutionalization. He continued David's policy of centralizing governance in Jerusalem, establishing both administrative infrastructure and religious oversight to maintain dynastic stability and covenantal fidelity. The Davidic line from David to Solomon reflects both legal and biological continuity. Solomon's inheritance included direct genealogical descent from David and formal recognition through dynastic protocols. These protocols incorporated public acknowledgement by tribal leaders, priestly endorsement, and adherence to customary legal frameworks governing succession. The genealogical continuity, therefore, encompasses both biological descent and socially validated transfer of authority, ensuring historical plausibility and theological significance within the biblical record. Solomon's reign is characterized by the construction of significant religious and administrative structures, most notably the First Temple in Jerusalem. This undertaking involved mobilization of labor, allocation of resources, and coordination of artisans and materials, consistent with known practices in the Levant and surrounding regions during the late 2nd millennium BC. The construction of the temple not only consolidated Solomon's political authority, but also reinforced the religious centrality of the Davidic line. This institutionalization of worship and covenantal observance provides historical context for understanding the preservation of the lineage and its theological significance in Israelite history. The economic and social policies implemented during Solomon's reign further contributed to the stability and continuity of the Davidic line. Solomon established trade networks extending to Egypt, Phoenicia, and the Arabian Peninsula, integrating the Israelite kingdom into broader regional economic systems. The acquisition of wealth through trade, taxation, and tribute supported both royal household management and the maintenance of administrative and military structures. These measures reinforce Solomon's ability to ensure the continuity of dynastic succession, providing a materially and socially stable environment for the propagation of the covenantal line. Marriage alliances during Solomon's reign further demonstrate strategic integration of political and genealogical objectives. Solomon entered into multiple marital unions with women from neighboring nations, including Egypt, Moab, and Aram, consistent with regional diplomatic practices. These alliances strengthened political ties, secured territorial boundaries, and integrated external influence into the governance framework. While these unions occasionally introduced socio-religious complexity, they maintained the genealogical continuity through offspring recognized within the dynastic succession plan, ensuring the preservation of the line leading to the messianic expectation. Solomon's biological descendants, recorded in biblical genealogies, represent the legal and dynastic heirs of David's covenantal line. While the biblical text does not enumerate all offspring exhaustively, it emphasizes the continuity through key figures who would maintain both political authority and covenantal fidelity. The line from David to Solomon preserves both historical plausibility and theological intention, integrating biological inheritance with dynastic validation through legal recognition and ritual affirmation. The transition from David to Solomon illustrates the intersection of covenantal promise, dynastic law, and historical governance. David's consolidation of Judahite and Israelite authority established the institutional framework for Solomon's succession, while Solomon's reign integrated political, religious, and economic structures to sustain the dynasty. The continuity of the Davidic line during this period is reinforced by attention to genealogical recording, formal acknowledgement of succession, and adherence to cultural and legal norms governing inheritance. These measures collectively ensured that the covenantal line remained intact and historically coherent, providing the foundation for the subsequent generations leading to the Babylonian exile and the eventual genealogical tracing to Jesus. Solomon's reign, while historically situated within the united monarchy, also reflects theological continuity from Judah through David. The biblical text emphasizes the fulfillment of divine promises associated with the Davidic covenant, linking Solomon's kingship to the overarching covenantal plan originating with Abraham. This integration of historical and theological frameworks establishes Solomon as a pivotal figure in the genealogical line, bridging the consolidation of the Israelite monarchy with the future expectation of messianic fulfillment. The management of Solomon's household, including administrative offices, religious oversight, and tribal coordination, exemplifies the practical measures necessary to preserve dynastic continuity. Resource allocation, labor organization, and governance strategies maintained both political stability and household integrity, ensuring that succession planning was feasible and consistent with covenantal expectations. The combination of biological descent, legal validation, and administrative competency positioned Solomon's offspring to continue the Davidic line without interruption, reinforcing historical and theological continuity. Chronologically, Solomon's life and reign provide temporal markers within the broader biblical genealogy. His birth, early life, accession to the throne, and construction projects anchor the line between David and subsequent kings, situating the Davidic dynasty within a historically plausible framework of late 2nd millennium and early 1st millennium BC Levantine society. These chronological markers facilitate the tracing of generational succession and reinforce the historical integrity of the genealogical line, leading ultimately to the messianic figure of Jesus. Solomon's integration of governance, religious centralization, and familial succession ensures that the covenantal promises originating with Judah and David were preserved. The combination of biological continuity, dynastic validation, and administrative control situates the Davidic line within historically credible structures. The genealogical record, therefore, reflects both theological purpose and practical historical reality, establishing Solomon as the central figure connecting Davidic kingship to the line through which the messianic expectation would be fulfilled. The family tree from Solomon to the Babylonian exile traces the descendants of David through the kings of Judah, illustrating both the continuity of the Davidic covenant and the historical realities of Israelite political, social, and religious life. Solomon's reign, traditionally dated to approximately 970 to 931 BC, established the centralized monarchy and religious institutions that shaped the governance of Judah and Israel. Following Solomon's death, the kingdom experienced division, political instability, and eventual conquest, yet the Davidic line persisted through the southern kingdom, preserving covenantal authority and dynastic succession, culminating in the exile to Babylon in the early 6th century BC. Solomon's immediate successor, Rehoboam, inherited both the throne and the challenges associated with the administration of a united but ethnically and regionally diverse kingdom. Rehoboam, son of Solomon and Naamah the Ammonite, assumed kingship around 931 BC. His accession followed customary royal protocols of succession, with formal acknowledgement by tribal elders and administrative officials. Rehoboam's initial actions, including the imposition of increased taxation and labor requirements, precipitated the secession of the northern tribes, forming the separate kingdom of Israel under Jeroboam I. This division established the geopolitical framework in which the Davidic line would continue exclusively through Judah and Benjamin, with Jerusalem remaining the political and religious capital. The southern kingdom of Judah, under Rehoboam, maintained administrative structures and dynastic continuity, with governance centered in Jerusalem. The line of Davidic kings in Judah included Rehoboam's sons Abijah and Asa, each contributing to the consolidation of royal authority and covenantal continuity. Abijah's reign, traditionally dated to 913 to 910 BC, involved military engagement with Israel and internal stabilization of Judahite governance. The biblical record emphasizes Abijah's reliance on dynastic legitimacy and adherence to the covenantal heritage of David, situating his reign within both historical plausibility and theological continuity. Asa, son of Abijah, reigned approximately 910 to 869 BC and further reinforced dynastic stability through administrative reform, religious oversight, and territorial defense. Asa's policies included the centralization of worship in Jerusalem, the removal of idolatrous practices within the kingdom, and military coordination against external threats, notably the Philistines and regional Canaanite factions. His reign illustrates the integration of political, military, and religious strategies necessary to maintain dynastic continuity within the historically plausible framework of early 1st millennium BC Judah. Following Asa, the Davidic line continued through Jehoshaphat, Jehoram, and subsequent monarchs, maintaining a pattern of hereditary succession. Jehoshaphat, reigning approximately 870 to 849 BC, engaged in both internal consolidation and regional diplomacy, including alliances with Israelite northern kings. His reign reflects the ongoing negotiation of political stability, economic management, and religious oversight characteristic of the Judahite monarchy. Jehoram, son of Jehoshaphat, succeeded circa 849 BC, inheriting both the challenges of internal governance and the external threats posed by neighboring states, particularly Philistine, Moabite, and Edomite entities. These monarchs operated within historically plausible parameters, balancing dynastic inheritance, tribal administration, and covenantal obligations. The Davidic line continued through Ahaziah, Athaliah, Queen Mother and occasional ruler, Joash, and Amaziah, each contributing to the persistence of the covenantal lineage. These generations reflect both political instability and continuity, with periods of regency, palace intrigue, and succession crises, yet the line remained traceable through male descendants of David. The recorded ages, reign lengths, and familial relationships provide chronological markers consistent with established biblical timelines and corroborate generational succession leading toward the late monarchic period preceding the Babylonian conquest. Uzziah, Azariah, reigning approximately 792 to 740 BC, exemplifies the integration of dynastic continuity with administrative and military expansion. Uzziah's reign included fortification of cities, management of agricultural production, and consolidation of military forces, situating the Davidic line within historically verifiable structures of early Israelite monarchy. The continuity of the line through Uzziah and his successors, Jotham, Ahaz, Hezekiah, demonstrates the preservation of covenantal authority despite regional political pressures, including Assyrian encroachment and socioeconomic instability. These kings maintained dynastic succession, coordinated religious observance, and engaged in infrastructure development consistent with known patterns of regional governance in the Levant. Hezekiah, reigning approximately 715 to 686 BC, is notable for religious reform and resistance to Assyrian domination. His administration centralized worship in Jerusalem, dismantled idolatrous sites, and engaged in fortification projects, including the construction of water systems to secure the city against siege. These measures, documented in both biblical and extra-biblical sources, provide a historically verifiable context for the preservation of the Davidic line and the territorial integrity of Judah. Hezekiah's son, Manasseh, continued the line through a period of political compromise and infrastructural consolidation, ensuring dynastic survival amid Assyrian hegemony. Subsequent monarchs, including Amon and Josiah, reflect both internal religious reform and external diplomatic engagement. Josiah, reigning approximately 640 to 609 BC, implemented extensive religious centralization and codified temple worship, integrating covenantal obligations with administrative oversight. His reign established the theological and political continuity of the Davidic line, ensuring that the lineage remained intact and recognizable within Judahite society. Josiah's descendants, including Jehoahaz, Jehoiakim, and Jehoiakim, Jeconiah, presided over Judah during the final decades preceding the Babylonian conquest, illustrating both dynastic continuity and the geopolitical vulnerability of Judah under rising imperial pressures. The Babylonian conquest, culminating in 586 BC, represents the historical transition point at which Judahite sovereignty was dissolved and the royal household was deported. Jehoiakim, along with members of the Davidic line, was taken into exile in Babylon under Nebuchadnezzar II. This deportation, historically corroborated by Babylonian records, reflects both the political realities of Near Eastern imperial expansion and the preservation of genealogical continuity through forced migration. Despite the loss of political control, the line of David persisted through exilic descendants, notably Shealtiel and Zerubbabel, ensuring that the covenantal lineage remained intact and traceable beyond the geopolitical collapse of Judah. The post-Solomonic period, spanning approximately 931 to 586 BC, integrates multiple generations of Davidic monarchs with historical and theological consistency. Each generation maintained covenantal fidelity through dynastic succession, marriage alliances, and territorial administration. The preservation of genealogical continuity under conditions of political instability, foreign threat, and economic fluctuation demonstrates the historical plausibility of the biblical record, while situating the Davidic line within measurable temporal and geopolitical frameworks. The genealogical record from Solomon to Jeconiah emphasizes the interplay between biological descent, dynastic legitimacy, and covenantal responsibility. Each monarch, while subject to internal and external pressures, contributed to the preservation of the lineage through both male line descent and institutionalized succession protocols. The maintenance of administrative structures, temple oversight, and regional alliances ensured that the Davidic line was recognized and protected, even amid periods of significant political upheaval, foreign domination, and social transformation. The historical and socio-political environment of Judah during this period encompasses urban administration, agrarian management, fortification projects, religious centralization, and engagement with neighboring states. The Davidic line, rooted in Judah, adapted to these realities while preserving both the genealogical integrity and theological significance of the covenantal promise. Solomon's establishment of the monarchy, combined with successive kings' efforts to maintain dynastic continuity, ensured that the lineage could be traced unbroken through multiple generations, culminating in the preservation of the covenantal line during exile. Chronologically, the period from Solomon's death to the Babylonian exile spans approximately 4 centuries. The recorded reigns of successive Davidic monarchs, with noted durations and familial relationships, provide a structured framework for understanding genealogical continuity. This temporal structure facilitates both historical analysis and theological interpretation, situating each generation within a plausible sequence of governance, territorial administration, and religious observance. The line from Solomon to Jeconiah illustrates the sustained integration of covenantal purpose with historical reality, enabling the eventual return from exile and continuation of the messianic lineage. The exile to Babylon, while representing a disruption in political sovereignty, did not terminate the Davidic line. The preservation of genealogical continuity through descendants such as Shealtiel and Zerubbabel ensured that the covenantal promise originating with Abraham, reinforced through David and institutionalized under Solomon, remained intact. The biblical record emphasizes both the historical and theological significance of this continuity, situating the Davidic line within a broader narrative of divine faithfulness, legal succession, and cultural identity, extending beyond the immediate geopolitical context of Judah. The line from Solomon to the Babylonian exile demonstrates a consistent integration of dynastic legitimacy, theological purpose, and historical plausibility. Each monarch contributed to the preservation of the covenantal lineage through governance, succession planning, and religious oversight, maintaining continuity despite internal and external challenges. The cumulative record of kingship, genealogical descent, and socio-political engagement provides a coherent framework for understanding the persistence of the Davidic line, setting the stage for post-exilic restoration and the eventual genealogical connection to Jesus. The genealogical line from Jeconiah, Jehoiakim, the last of the Davidic kings of Judah before the Babylonian exile, to Zerubbabel illustrates the preservation of the Davidic covenant through the post-exilic period. Jeconiah, who reigned briefly around 598 to 597 BC, was taken into captivity by Nebuchadnezzar II following the conquest of Jerusalem, a historical event corroborated by both biblical records and Babylonian documents. Despite the political disruption and removal of the royal household, the genealogical continuity of the Davidic line was maintained, ensuring the covenantal promise of an enduring dynasty persisted through successive generations. Jeconiah's deportation to Babylon included members of the royal family, nobles, and skilled laborers. In Babylon, the Davidic line continued to exist within a framework of exilic administration, subject to oversight by Babylonian authorities while maintaining internal familial structures. Jeconiah's sons, including Shealtiel, inherited both the symbolic and genealogical legacy of the Davidic covenant. Shealtiel is recognized as a critical figure bridging the pre-exilic and post-exilic periods, preserving the genealogical record that would later facilitate the restoration of leadership in Judah. Shealtiel's presence in Babylon highlights the continuity of the line under conditions of foreign domination, demonstrating that political exile did not disrupt the covenantal succession. Shealtiel's son Zerubbabel, born in Babylon during the exile, represents the culmination of the immediate post-exilic generation and the initiation of the restoration period in Judah. The name Zerubbabel, meaning seed of Babylon, reflects both historical circumstance and genealogical significance, signaling the preservation of the Davidic line outside the territorial boundaries of Judah. Zerubbabel's historical context is situated in the late 6th century BC, coinciding with the decree of Cyrus the Great of Persia, c. 539 BC, allowing the return of exiled peoples to Judah and the rebuilding of Jerusalem. This period aligns with broader Near Eastern political transitions, in which Persian imperial policies facilitated local governance and the restoration of religious communities. The return from Babylon, undertaken by Zerubbabel and other exiles, involved the re-establishment of political, religious, and social structures within Judah. Zerubbabel, recognized as governor, assumed leadership responsibilities over the returned population, overseeing the reconstruction of the temple, the administration of urban settlements, and coordination with Persian authorities. His role demonstrates the integration of genealogical legitimacy with historical governance, as the Davidic line retained both symbolic and functional authority in the context of Persian imperial oversight. Zerubbabel's lineage, recorded in biblical genealogies, emphasizes continuity from Abraham through David and Solomon, extending to the post-exilic period. His paternal ancestry through Shealtiel links him directly to Jeconiah and, by extension, to the Davidic covenant, preserving the theological significance of the line despite the geopolitical and social disruptions of the exile. The genealogical record ensures that the covenantal promise, including the eventual expectation of the messianic figure, remained intact across successive generations, maintaining both historical plausibility and theological integrity. The reconstruction period under Zerubbabel involved coordinated efforts with religious leaders, including Joshua the high priest, and engagement with the returning community to re-establish sacrificial and liturgical practices. Temple construction, initiated under his leadership, required the mobilization of labor, allocation of resources, and interaction with local populations. These efforts exemplify historically verifiable administrative practices in post-exilic Judah, situating Zerubbabel's leadership within a plausible socio-political and religious framework. The preservation of the Davidic line through Zerubbabel ensured that both dynastic succession and covenantal continuity were maintained in accordance with historical and biblical precedent. Zerubbabel's descendants, as recorded in genealogical sources, are integral to maintaining the post-exilic Davidic line. These generations include historical figures whose primary significance is rooted in genealogical and religious continuity rather than political sovereignty, as the Persian governance system limited the independent political authority of Judahite leaders. Nevertheless, the Davidic line remained identifiable and symbolically authoritative, ensuring that subsequent generations could trace their lineage through Zerubbabel to Jeconiah, David, and ultimately to Solomon and Judah. This continuity preserved both the covenantal framework and the historical legitimacy of the royal line. The period following the exile also reflects broader demographic, social, and economic transitions within Judah. Returnees under Zerubbabel faced challenges related to urban reconstruction, agricultural resettlement, and integration with local populations. Genealogical continuity served as a stabilizing factor, maintaining a sense of identity, authority, and religious legitimacy amid these socio-political transitions. The Davidic line provided a framework for leadership, coordinating both civic and cultic responsibilities, while preserving the covenantal heritage that formed the basis of Israelite identity in the post-exilic period. Chronologically, Zerubbabel's leadership is situated in the late 6th century BC, following the fall of Babylon to Persia in 539 BC and the issuance of the Edict of Cyrus in 538 BC. This temporal context situates the post-exilic Davidic line within a clear historical framework, illustrating both generational continuity and interaction with imperial governance. The genealogical record, extending from Jeconiah through Shealtiel to Zerubbabel, maintains precise generational markers, ensuring historical accuracy and continuity of the covenantal line. The genealogical continuity from Jeconiah to Zerubbabel also illustrates the preservation of theological purpose across generations. The Davidic covenant, established through God's promise to David regarding an enduring lineage, remained intact despite exile, political upheaval, and foreign domination. Zerubbabel's leadership in Judah, including temple reconstruction and community organization, demonstrates the integration of genealogical legitimacy with historical function, ensuring that covenantal and practical objectives were preserved simultaneously. This integration underscores the historical plausibility and theological significance of the post-exilic Davidic line. In addition to administrative and religious responsibilities, Zerubbabel's descendants maintained connections with regional trade and cultural networks, integrating Judah into broader Persian imperial systems. These interactions facilitated economic stability and social cohesion, providing the necessary framework for preserving genealogical continuity. The Davidic line's survival through these generations demonstrates both resilience and adaptability, ensuring that covenantal promises were not disrupted by external political conditions. Zerubbabel's post-exilic leadership also served as a model for subsequent governance within Judah, establishing precedents for the coordination of civil and religious duties under external sovereignty. His administration combined historical plausibility with theological continuity, illustrating how genealogical legitimacy was maintained even when political autonomy was limited. The genealogical record from Jeconiah through Shealtiel to Zerubbabel provides a direct, traceable line, ensuring that the Davidic covenant remained verifiable and authoritative for future generations. The post-exilic period, anchored by Zerubbabel, also reflects demographic realities of resettlement and reconstruction. Returnees faced challenges in reclaiming property, rebuilding urban centers, and re-establishing religious observances. Genealogical continuity through Zerubbabel provided a framework for leadership, legitimizing authority, and guiding the reorganization of communities. The preservation of this line ensured that Israelite identity, covenantal observance, and dynastic recognition remained coherent throughout the restoration process. Zerubbabel's integration of genealogical authority with practical leadership responsibilities highlights the ongoing interaction between biological descent and historical function. His role demonstrates that the Davidic line's continuity was not merely symbolic but operational, involving governance, religious administration, and community coordination. The post-exilic Davidic line thus combines theological purpose, historical plausibility, and practical function, maintaining the integrity of the lineage from pre-exilic monarchs through the Babylonian exile and restoration period. The chronological and genealogical record situates Zerubbabel as the critical link between the Davidic line prior to the exile and the subsequent generations leading toward the Second Temple period. His position ensures the transmission of both covenantal promise and genealogical legitimacy across the transitional period, establishing a clear continuity of lineage. The maintenance of genealogical records, adherence to succession protocols, and integration with Persian administrative structures collectively reinforced the historical credibility of the Davidic line. The line from Jeconiah through Shealtiel to Zerubbabel exemplifies the intersection of divine purpose, historical events, and genealogical continuity. Despite the challenges of exile and foreign governance, the Davidic covenant persisted, providing theological validation and historical coherence. Zerubbabel's descendants ensured that the lineage could continue to fulfill the covenantal promise, preserving the foundation for the genealogical tracing of Jesus as a descendant of David, thereby linking post-exilic restoration with messianic expectation. The genealogical line that proceeds from Zerubbabel to Joseph, as recorded in the Gospel of Matthew, establishes the legal continuity of the Davidic covenant across successive generations, culminating in the legal paternity of Jesus. Zerubbabel, a descendant of the Davidic line exiled to Babylon, led the first group of returnees to Judah under Persian authorization, overseeing the reconstruction of Jerusalem and the Second Temple in the late 6th century BC. Through him, the Davidic lineage persisted in Judah despite centuries of political upheaval, foreign domination, and socio-religious transformations. The legal lineage traced in Matthew emphasizes Jesus' claim to Davidic kingship, presenting Joseph as the legal heir through whom the covenantal promise is realized. Zerubbabel's immediate descendants, though not politically sovereign in the post-exilic Persian context, preserved the genealogical and covenantal authority of David's line. Genealogical records maintained within priestly and civic registers documented familial relationships, ensuring recognition of the line of succession. Zerubbabel's son, Abiad, continued the line, residing in Judah during the Persian period, a time characterized by relative local autonomy under imperial oversight. Persian governance allowed limited administrative authority to local leaders, including descendants of David, who coordinated civic, agricultural, and religious activities while maintaining genealogical legitimacy. These descendants integrated familial continuity with historical realities, ensuring both identity and covenantal fidelity. Abiad's son, Eliakim, represents the second post-exilic generation, maintaining continuity through recorded lineage. Historical records indicate that these families, though no longer kings in a sovereign sense, retained social status within the Jewish community, participating in the administration of Jerusalem, the Temple, and regional settlements. Genealogical recognition provided social and religious authority, permitting descendants to act as leaders in civic and religious contexts. The line of Abiad through Eliakim, therefore, reflects both legal and social continuity, bridging the Persian period and the early Hellenistic influences that emerged after Alexander the Great's conquests in the 4th century BC. Eliakim's son, Azor, continued the genealogical record, preserving the legal line through successive generations. These generations existed within a broader historical context of Persian provincial governance, economic restoration, and resettlement of Judah. The community maintained historical, genealogical, and religious traditions, including accurate records of lineage critical for temple service, marriage eligibility, and leadership roles. Azor's descendants, through meticulous documentation and adherence to familial and covenantal obligations, ensured that the Davidic line remained verifiable and authoritative, enabling the continued recognition of dynastic legitimacy despite centuries of external domination. The line continues through Sadok, a descendant of Azor, and subsequently through Achim, both figures maintaining the legal and genealogical framework essential for preserving the Davidic covenant. These generations resided in Judah under Persian and later Hellenistic influence, navigating the intersection of local governance, cultural integration, and religious observance. Historical context includes the administrative reforms of the Persian satraps, the influence of Hellenistic culture following Alexander's campaigns, and the gradual reassertion of Jewish religious identity through the temple-centered community. These circumstances reinforced the importance of genealogical records for both civic and religious purposes. Achim's son, Eliud, represents the continuation of the Davidic legal line into the late Persian and early Hellenistic periods. Genealogical records maintained through these generations served not only to preserve covenantal promises, but also to provide legal validation for claims to Davidic authority. These descendants, while lacking political sovereignty, were recognized within Jewish society as bearers of the covenantal line, eligible for roles in religious and civic leadership. Historical realities, including taxation, Persian administrative oversight, and exposure to Hellenistic cultural influences, required these families to maintain internal cohesion and clear genealogical records. Eliud's son, Eleazar, and his descendants continued the line through successive generations, preserving both biological and legal continuity. The preservation of this line through tumultuous periods, Persian rule, Alexander's conquests, and the subsequent division of his empire among Ptolemaic and Seleucid authorities, illustrates the resilience of genealogical transmission. Families associated with the Davidic line maintained identity markers, genealogical registers, and social recognition to ensure the integrity of succession, even when political authority was limited or symbolic. The line from Eleazar continued through Mathan and subsequently Jacob, who lived during the late Hellenistic period. These generations witnessed the growing tension between Jewish autonomy and Hellenistic influence, including cultural integration, urbanization, and intermittent political revolts. Despite these external pressures, genealogical preservation remained a priority, reinforcing the covenantal and legal significance of the Davidic line. Social structures, familial cohesion, and religious observance contributed to the continuity of the line, situating descendants within both civic and religious frameworks that validated their lineage. Jacob's son, Joseph, emerges as the final figure in the legal genealogy recorded by Matthew before the birth of Jesus. Joseph, a resident of Nazareth in Galilee, was recognized within Jewish society as the legal heir to Davidic authority, fulfilling the requirements for both covenantal and legal succession. His marriage to Mary, herself a descendant of David through a different line traced in Luke, consolidates the legal and biological claims to the Davidic heritage. Joseph's legal authority, established through genealogical continuity from Zerubbabel, ensured that Jesus could be recognized under Jewish law as a descendant of David, satisfying messianic expectations associated with the covenantal promises. The post-exilic generations from Zerubbabel to Joseph illustrate the interplay between legal continuity, historical circumstances, and religious observance. These generations navigated the complexities of Persian and Hellenistic governance, integrating administrative obligations, economic management, and cultural interaction while preserving genealogical integrity. Records of births, marriages, and familial relationships ensured the unbroken transmission of the Davidic line, enabling recognition of legal heirs across centuries. The family tree demonstrates resilience in maintaining both covenantal and social legitimacy, bridging the gap between the exilic restoration and the early 1st century AD. Chronologically, the period from Zerubbabel to Joseph spans approximately 5 centuries, covering late 6th century BC, post-exilic restoration through Persian governance, Hellenistic influence from the 4th century BC, and the Herodian and Roman periods in the early 1st century AD. Each generational link provides historical markers, situating the line within verified temporal frameworks, administrative structures, and socio-religious contexts. These markers allow for the tracing of legal and genealogical continuity, reinforcing the historical and theological significance of the Davidic lineage as it culminates in Joseph. The genealogical continuity preserved through these generations emphasizes the interplay between biological descent and legal recognition. Legal acknowledgement of heirs, maintenance of genealogical registers, and adherence to social norms governing succession enabled the Davidic line to remain intact despite periods of limited sovereignty. Joseph's position as the legal father of Jesus situates him within this verified lineage, establishing the framework through which Jesus' messianic credentials are historically and theologically authenticated. The preservation of this line ensured that the covenantal promise, first articulated with Abraham and solidified through David and Solomon, was transmitted intact to the 1st century AD. The historical significance of the line from Zerubbabel to Joseph also includes the socio-religious responsibilities associated with leadership and community cohesion. These descendants maintained engagement with temple practices, local governance, and civic administration, reinforcing both familial authority and social identity. Their genealogical legitimacy was recognized within Jewish society, ensuring that the Davidic line remained relevant, identifiable, and authoritative within religious and legal contexts. The line's continuity illustrates the integration of generational fidelity, socio-political adaptation, and covenantal purpose across successive centuries. Genealogical preservation during this period was also facilitated by structured record-keeping practices, including temple registries, family archives, and oral traditions validated by communal authority. These records allowed for verification of lineage, maintenance of social standing, and fulfillment of religious obligations associated with covenantal continuity. Through these mechanisms, the descendants of Zerubbabel maintained unbroken recognition of Davidic descent, culminating in Joseph's legal status as a legitimate heir of the covenantal line, preparing the framework for the historical birth of Jesus. The line from Zerubbabel to Joseph, therefore, exemplifies the continuity of the Davidic covenant across post-exilic, Persian, Hellenistic, and early Roman periods. Each generation contributed to the preservation of genealogical, legal, and covenantal integrity, ensuring that the lineage remained verifiable, authoritative, and historically coherent. The legal genealogy recorded in Matthew underscores the importance of dynastic and covenantal continuity, situating Joseph as the legitimate legal father of Jesus within a historically grounded, theologically significant framework. The genealogy of Jesus, as presented in the Gospel of Luke, traces a biological line extending backward from Joseph, the legal father of Jesus, to Adam, the first human according to biblical tradition. This lineage, distinct from Matthew's legal genealogy, emphasizes biological descent through Mary, connecting Jesus not only to David and Abraham, but to all humanity. The Luke genealogy situates Jesus within a universal framework, highlighting his identification with the entirety of human history while preserving the theological continuity of the messianic line. Beginning with Joseph, Luke identifies him as the immediate ancestor of Jesus, situating him within first-century Galilean society. Joseph's genealogical significance rests on both his legal connection to the Davidic line and his relationship to Mary, through whom Jesus' biological descent is traced. While Matthew emphasizes legal kingship through Solomon, Luke's account highlights biological continuity through David's son Nathan, establishing a direct bloodline that preserves covenantal inheritance alongside universal human ancestry. The distinction between legal and biological descent allows the genealogy to demonstrate both Jewish messianic legitimacy and universal relevance. From Joseph, the lineage traces through successive ancestors, including Heli, traditionally identified as Joseph's father by interpretation, though some scholars suggest that Heli represents Mary's lineage. Heli's generation situates the genealogy in the late Persian or early Hellenistic period, aligning chronologically with post-exilic restoration in Judah and Galilee. This period was marked by administrative reorganization under Persian authority, economic recovery following the Babylonian exile, and early integration of Hellenistic cultural influence. Genealogical records maintained in Jewish communities during this era ensured the preservation of familial continuity and social legitimacy. Luke's genealogy continues through successive generations, including Mathat, Levi, Melchi, Janai, and Joseph, extending through the intertestamental period. This period, approximately 400 years between the Persian Restoration and the Roman occupation, is characterized by socio-political transitions, including Hellenistic influence following Alexander the Great's conquests, the emergence of local dynasties, and the development of Jewish religious and legal traditions. Families within the Davidic line, including those connected to Joseph and Mary, maintain genealogical continuity through temple records, community recognition, and adherence to marriage and inheritance practices. The lineage proceeds through Mattathias, Amos, Nahum, Esli, Nagai, Math, and Mattathiah, representing generations living under the shifting influence of Ptolemaic and Seleucid authorities. These descendants, though lacking independent political sovereignty, retained social and religious status in Judahite society. Genealogical continuity was crucial for preserving claims to the Davidic covenant, ensuring recognition of messianic legitimacy. Historical records and traditions within the Jewish community reinforced lineage through carefully maintained family registries, which provided both legal validation and social authority. Continuing through Semain, Josek, Joda, Jonan, Risa, Zerubbabel, the genealogy aligns with post-exilic restoration efforts, including the rebuilding of the temple, reorganization of Jerusalem, and restoration of religious practices under Persian oversight. Zerubbabel, a central figure in this period, represents the transition from exilic displacement to local restoration. Through his descendants, genealogical continuity is maintained in accordance with covenantal expectations, ensuring that the line leading to Jesus remains intact and historically verifiable. The inclusion of Zerubbabel situates Luke's genealogy within both historical context and theological continuity. Following Zerubbabel, the line continues through Abiad, Eliakim, Azor, Zadok, Achim, Eliud, Eleazar, Matthan, and Jacob, bridging the post-exilic period to the late Hellenistic era. These generations, situated in Galilee and Judea, witnessed the gradual encroachment of Roman influence, the consolidation of local governance, and the preservation of Jewish cultural and religious identity. Families associated with the Davidic line maintained genealogical registers and participated in civic and temple activities, ensuring that biological descent remained both verifiable and recognized within the broader Jewish community. Jacob's son, Joseph, the immediate ancestor of Jesus, represents the culmination of this biological line before the Nativity. Through Joseph, Luke establishes a traceable descent from David via Nathan rather than Solomon, complementing Matthew's legal genealogy and emphasizing biological continuity alongside theological legitimacy. This distinction underscores the integration of messianic expectations with universal human ancestry, situating Jesus as both the Jewish Messiah and a descendant of all humanity through Adam. The genealogical line extends beyond David to Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and further through Judah, Perez, Hezron, Arni, Admin, and Amminadab, reflecting the ancestral continuity of the covenantal promise. Each generation contributes to the historical plausibility and theological significance of the lineage, ensuring that the Davidic covenant is preserved through successive descendants. The biblical record situates these ancestors within historically plausible sociopolitical contexts, including Canaanite settlement patterns, Egyptian sojourns, and early Israelite tribal structures. Continuing backward, the line includes figures such as Nahshon, Salmon, Boaz, Obed, Jesse, and David, each of whom is historically and genealogically significant. David's kingship establishes the covenantal framework guaranteeing an enduring lineage, linking Jesus to both royal authority and prophetic expectation. Boaz and Obed, through their participation in Israelite society, provide the genealogical bridge connecting Judahite tribes with the emerging Davidic line. Genealogical accuracy during these periods relied on oral transmission, temple records, and community recognition, ensuring historical plausibility and continuity of descent. The genealogy proceeds through the patriarchs Isaac, Abraham, Terah, and Nahor, situating Jesus within the covenantal promise originally articulated to Abraham. Abraham's lineage establishes the theological and historical foundation for the messianic expectation, linking biological descent to divine purpose. Isaac and Jacob continue this lineage, solidifying the tribal and familial framework necessary for the development of Israelite identity, covenantal adherence, and historical continuity. These ancestors provide both temporal markers and socio-religious context, situating the genealogy within verifiable historical and biblical frameworks. Luke's genealogy extends to the first human, Adam, underscoring the theological universality of Jesus' ancestry. Adam represents the origin of humanity, connecting Jesus biologically to all people and framing the messianic role as inclusive of the entire human race. The genealogical line from Adam through Seth, Enosh, Kenan, Mahalalel, Jared, Enoch, Methuselah, Lamech, and Noah situates the biblical narrative within a historical and chronological framework. Noah's sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, provide the foundation for the post-flood repopulation of the earth, linking Israelite genealogy with broader human history. From Noah through Shem, the line continues through Arphaxad, Shelah, Eber, Peleg, Ru, Serug, Nahor, Terah, and culminates in Abraham. These generations reflect plausible chronological intervals, integrating biblical lifespans with socio-historical context. The genealogical continuity emphasizes both biological descent and the maintenance of covenantal promises across successive generations. Communities preserved records through oral traditions, temple documentation, and familial registers, ensuring historical verifiability and continuity. The genealogical record from Adam to Jesus highlights the integration of theological, historical, and social dimensions. Biological descent provides a universal framework situating Jesus within the entirety of human history, while genealogical records preserve covenantal continuity from Abraham and David. Each generation, situated within historically plausible contexts, contributes to the understanding of Jesus' identity as both Messiah and descendant of all humanity. The biological line traced in Luke complements the legal line recorded in Matthew, illustrating dual dimensions of messianic legitimacy. Matthew emphasizes legal succession and royal inheritance through Solomon, while Luke emphasizes biological continuity through Nathan and a universal connection to humanity. This dual lineage ensures that Jesus' identity as Messiah is validated both in covenantal terms and within the broader context of human history, providing historical, theological, and genealogical coherence. The post-exilic and early first-century ancestors in Luke's genealogy, including Zerubbabel, Abiad, Eliakim, and Joseph, reflect historical realities of Roman-occupied Judea. Their existence and recorded relationships demonstrate continuity in genealogical documentation, social recognition, and religious observance. These generations maintain the integrity of lineage through careful record-keeping, community acknowledgement, and adherence to familial and religious norms, ensuring that Jesus' biological ancestry could be traced with historical plausibility. The Luke genealogy underscores the theological principle that the Messiah is not only the fulfillment of Jewish covenantal expectation, but also the representative of all humanity. By tracing the line from Joseph to Adam, Luke establishes the universality of Jesus' mission, situating him within the full span of human history. This perspective complements historical records of Jewish society, Persian and Hellenistic governance, and Roman-era sociopolitical structures, ensuring that the genealogy is both historically grounded and theologically coherent. The genealogical convergence of Joseph and Mary represents the culmination of the dual lineages traced in Matthew and Luke, situating Jesus within both legal and biological frameworks of Davidic descent. Joseph, as recorded in Matthew, is the legal heir to the throne of David through Solomon, establishing a covenantal and royal claim to the messianic inheritance. Mary, whose lineage is traced in Luke through Nathan, another son of David, preserves biological descent, ensuring that Jesus' ancestry aligns with both covenantal law and universal human connection. This dual convergence underscores the historical and theological coherence of Jesus' messianic legitimacy while situating him within first-century Galilean society. Joseph, a resident of Nazareth in Galilee, is described as a man of Davidic descent, legally recognized as the heir of Davidic kingship. The Gospel of Matthew situates him in the context of Herodian and Roman governance, noting the administrative structures and political realities of Judea and Galilee in the early 1st century AD. Joseph's genealogical significance is reinforced through meticulous preservation of lineage records, which were maintained through temple registries, community recognition, and family documentation. These records ensured that Joseph's legal claim to Davidic kingship remained verifiable within Jewish society, validating his eligibility as the legal father of Jesus under covenantal law. Mary's lineage, as presented in Luke, traces her biological descent through Nathan, establishing a genealogical connection to David independent of the legal succession through Solomon. This lineage situates Mary within the post-exilic Jewish community, reflecting continuity through generations living under Persian, Hellenistic, and Roman influence. Mary's ancestors maintained both social and religious responsibilities within Judean society, preserving genealogical integrity through community acknowledgement, temple affiliation, and observance of covenantal practices. Her lineage provides the biological basis for Jesus' Davidic descent, complementing Joseph's legal claim and reinforcing the fulfillment of messianic prophecy. The convergence of Joseph and Mary's genealogies occurs within a socio-political framework characterized by Roman imperial administration, local governance under Herod Antipas, and the cultural milieu of Galilee. Nazareth, a small settlement in the Galilean highlands, functioned as an agricultural and civic community, maintaining religious observances consistent with Second Temple Judaism. Both Joseph and Mary would have participated in these local religious and civic structures, providing historical context for their genealogical recognition and social standing. Genealogical records preserved within such communities ensured that familial continuity, inheritance rights, and religious legitimacy were accurately maintained. Joseph's legal lineage through Solomon and David situates him within the framework of the Davidic covenant, emphasizing continuity of royal authority. Each generation between Solomon and Joseph, including Zerubbabel, Abiad, Eliakim, Azor, Zadok, Achim, Eliud, Eleazar, Mathan, and Jacob, represents a historical link spanning post-exilic restoration, Persian and Hellenistic influence, and the socio-political realities of Roman-occupied Judea. These generations illustrate the integration of genealogical preservation with historical governance, religious practice, and social recognition, ensuring that Joseph's legal claim remained credible and verifiable. Mary's ancestry similarly demonstrates continuity through generations, though distinct in tracing descent through Nathan rather than Solomon. This line preserves biological inheritance, highlighting Jesus' direct human lineage and connecting him universally to the covenantal promises of David and Abraham. Ancestors in Mary's line, including Heli, Mathat, Levi, Melchi, Janai, Joseph, and others, lived through the late Persian and Hellenistic periods, navigating challenges of governance, cultural integration, and religious observance. Their genealogical preservation reflects both social recognition and theological intent, ensuring that the biological Davidic line was maintained and verifiable within the Jewish community. The genealogical union of Joseph and Mary not only merges legal and biological lines, but also situates Jesus within the historical and cultural context of first-century Galilee. Nazareth's agrarian economy, local governance structures, and adherence to Second Temple religious practices provided the environment in which these families preserved lineage, managed civic obligations, and participated in regional religious observances. This setting allowed for the accurate transmission of genealogical knowledge, ensuring continuity and historical plausibility in tracing Jesus' ancestry. Both Joseph and Mary would have been cognizant of the significance of their lineage within Jewish society. The legal and biological claims to Davidic descent carried implications for messianic expectation, community status, and religious observance. Families of Davidic descent were historically recognized for their covenantal role, participation in temple service, and maintenance of genealogical records. Through these structures, the genealogical integrity of Joseph and Mary's families was verified and maintained, ensuring that the convergence of their lineages provided a historically coherent and theologically significant foundation for the birth of Jesus. The socio-religious functions of both lineages extended beyond genealogy. Joseph's legal descent positioned him as a guardian of covenantal continuity, responsible for ensuring compliance with Jewish law, inheritance rights, and participation in temple obligations. Mary's biological lineage reinforced Jesus' direct connection to the covenantal promises, linking him to Abraham, David, and ultimately to Adam, establishing the universality of descent. Together, Joseph and Mary represented the integration of legal authority, covenantal responsibility, and biological continuity, providing a robust historical framework for Jesus' identity. Chronologically, the convergence of these genealogical lines occurs in the early 1st century AD, during the administration of Quirinius as governor of Syria and under the rule of Herod the Great in Judea. Historical records, including Roman administrative documents and archaeological findings, contextualize the political and social environment of Nazareth, Bethlehem, and surrounding regions. Genealogical records maintained within this period allowed for verification of lineage claims, ensuring that Joseph and Mary's heritage remained both socially and religiously recognized, forming a continuous line from David to the 1st century. The genealogical preservation from Abraham to Joseph and Mary demonstrates the integration of theological, legal, and historical dimensions. Legal descent through Joseph satisfies covenantal requirements for kingship and fulfillment of prophecy, while biological descent through Mary preserves direct Davidic lineage. Each generational link reflects historical plausibility, including exilic restoration, Persian governance, Hellenistic influence, and Roman occupation. These factors collectively situate the convergence of Joseph and Mary's lineages within a credible historical and socio-religious framework. Historical sources indicate that families of Davidic descent, such as those of Joseph and Mary, maintained careful genealogical documentation through temple affiliations, civic recognition, and communal memory. This documentation ensured the accurate transmission of lineage across centuries, allowing both legal and biological claims to be verified. The convergence of these genealogies exemplifies the careful preservation of covenantal and ancestral records, reinforcing the legitimacy of Jesus' messianic identity within 1st century Jewish society. The genealogical framework of Joseph and Mary also reflects demographic and cultural continuity within Galilee and Judea. Families traced lineage not only for religious and legal purposes, but also for social cohesion, inheritance rights, and community recognition. In this context, Joseph and Mary's union ensured that both legal and biological dimensions of Davidic descent were preserved and transmitted to subsequent generations, situating Jesus historically and theologically within the Davidic covenant. This genealogical convergence also provides historical context for the fulfillment of prophetic expectations regarding the Messiah. The integration of legal and biological lines demonstrates adherence to covenantal stipulations articulated in the Hebrew Scriptures, including the promise that the Messiah would descend from David. The meticulous preservation of genealogical records across centuries, through periods of exile, foreign rule, and cultural transformation, validates the historical and theological integrity of this lineage, establishing a credible foundation for the narrative of Jesus' birth and identity. Joseph and Mary's lineages exemplify the interplay of historical accuracy, covenantal preservation, and genealogical continuity. Their families maintain the integrity of Davidic descent through multiple generations, navigating Persian, Hellenistic, and Roman political contexts while preserving social and religious authority. This continuity ensured that both legal and biological claims could be substantiated, providing the necessary framework for the messianic legitimacy of Jesus in accordance with biblical prophecy. Through their convergence, Joseph and Mary unify legal authority, biological descent, and covenantal promise. Joseph's lineage through Solomon provides legal claim to the Davidic throne, while Mary's descent through Nathan preserves direct biological inheritance. Together, they represent the integration of historical plausibility, socio-religious recognition, and theological significance, situating Jesus within a coherent genealogical and historical framework. This dual convergence ensures that Jesus' ancestry fulfills both legal and biological requirements, reinforcing the verifiable continuity of the Davidic covenant from the patriarchs to the early 1st century AD. The birth of Jesus in Bethlehem represents a convergence of genealogical, historical, and theological significance, integrating both legal and biological lineage within the context of 1st century Judea. This event situates Jesus within the Davidic covenant, fulfills prophetic expectation, and occurs against the backdrop of Roman administration and Herodian rule. Bethlehem, a town of modest size located approximately 6 kilometers south of Jerusalem, held historical and religious significance as the birthplace of King David, making it a central location for the continuation of the Davidic line. The town's social, economic, and religious structures provide the historical context for the birth of Jesus, highlighting the interplay of lineage, prophecy, and socio-political environment. Joseph, as the legal heir to Davidic authority, resided in Nazareth, a village in the Galilean highlands, while Mary, his betrothed, was likewise connected to the same genealogical and social networks. Their union represents the merging of legal and biological claims to the Davidic line. According to the Gospel of Matthew and the Gospel of Luke, Mary was found to be with child through divine conception, situating the forthcoming birth of Jesus within both theological and historical frameworks. This event occurs during the reign of Herod the Great, who governed Judea under Roman authority from 37 BC to 4 BC, a period characterized by significant political centralization, temple reconstruction, and economic development. The circumstances of Jesus' birth are closely linked to Roman administrative practices. Luke notes that a census was conducted by Quirinius, governor of Syria, requiring individuals to return to their ancestral towns for registration. Joseph, being of Davidic descent, traveled from Nazareth to Bethlehem, fulfilling the requirement of returning to the city of his lineage. Bethlehem, recognized as the city of David, served as a locus for genealogical registration, ensuring the preservation of legal and familial records. These records were maintained by local authorities and temple officials, providing verification of lineage and facilitating taxation and administrative control. Mary accompanied Joseph to Bethlehem, where the birth of Jesus occurred. The narrative emphasizes the historical reality of a birth in a provincial Judean town, reflecting socioeconomic conditions typical of rural Galilean and Judean communities. Bethlehem's population consisted primarily of agrarian families engaged in agriculture, animal husbandry, and local trade. Residential structures were modest, consisting of single-room dwellings or family compounds, and families maintained close social and economic networks. The environment of Bethlehem at this time was influenced by Roman administration, local Herodian governance, and the cultural integration of Hellenistic and Judean practices. The birth of Jesus, while a theological event, is historically situated within these social and administrative contexts. The family's presence in Bethlehem aligned with the census and legal registration, ensuring Joseph's identification as a Davidic descendant was verifiable. Genealogical verification through ancestral towns and community recognition was standard practice in Judea, particularly for families maintaining claims to property, inheritance, and legal status. The birth of Jesus within this framework preserves both historical plausibility and the continuity of covenantal inheritance, linking him to David through legal and biological descent. Bethlehem's significance as the birthplace of Jesus extends beyond its historical association with David. Prophetic texts in the Hebrew Scriptures, including Micah 5 verse 2, identified Bethlehem as the town from which a ruler would emerge who would shepherd Israel. This connection situates the birth of Jesus within the broader theological narrative of messianic expectation. The prophetic identification of Bethlehem as the locus of Davidic succession reinforces the historical appropriateness of Joseph and Mary's presence in the town, integrating genealogical, social, and theological considerations within the historical context of early 1st century Judea. The administration of Herod the Great provides additional historical context for the birth. Herod's reign was characterized by the consolidation of political authority, fortification of urban centers, and extensive building projects, including the expansion of the Second Temple in Jerusalem. Roman oversight of Judea involved local taxation, registration, and the maintenance of order through client kings such as Herod. The census mandated by Quirinius, recorded in Luke, reflects these administrative practices, situating the birth of Jesus within a verifiable historical framework. The requirement for ancestral registration underscores the integration of genealogical, legal, and administrative structures in Judea. Mary's role in this context reflects adherence to familial and social obligations within Jewish society. Her presence in Bethlehem with Joseph ensured compliance with legal and genealogical expectations, maintaining the continuity of Davidic inheritance. The preservation of genealogical identity was central to social and religious life, providing verification of lineage for property, inheritance, and legal claims. Mary's biological descent from David, through Nathan, complements Joseph's legal lineage through Solomon, ensuring that Jesus' ancestry is historically coherent and consistent with covenantal requirements. The socioeconomic conditions of Bethlehem shaped the circumstances of Jesus' birth. The town, situated in a hilly region with fertile agricultural land, supported a population engaged primarily in subsistence and local commerce. Family compounds provided limited space, and social structures emphasized intergenerational continuity, economic cooperation, and participation in religious observances at the local synagogue and the Jerusalem temple. Joseph and Mary's presence in Bethlehem reflects both administrative necessity and integration into the social and religious fabric of the town, situating the birth of Jesus within historically verifiable conditions. The genealogical convergence at Bethlehem also aligns with broader historical trends in Judea. Post-exilic restoration, Persian and Hellenistic influence, and Roman administrative control had shaped local society, emphasizing legal recognition of ancestry, preservation of religious practice, and community cohesion. Families of Davidic descent maintained records and social recognition, ensuring that lineage claims were verifiable across generations. The birth of Jesus in Bethlehem represents the culmination of this continuity, integrating genealogical preservation, legal recognition, and historical plausibility. Roman and Herodian influence further contextualizes the event. Herod's administration imposed taxation, legal oversight, and urban development policies that affected daily life in Judea. Roman census practices, required for taxation and administrative purposes, provide historical verification for the movement of Joseph and Mary from Nazareth to Bethlehem. These movements, while minor in scale, reflect adherence to imperial law and demonstrate the integration of local genealogical and legal practices with broader imperial governance. Bethlehem's role as a registration site reinforces its historical significance as a town of Davidic lineage. The birth of Jesus in Bethlehem exemplifies the intersection of genealogy, prophecy, and historical circumstance. Legal lineage through Joseph ensured fulfillment of covenantal expectation, while biological descent through Mary preserved Davidic continuity and universal human connection. The location of Bethlehem, in proximity to Jerusalem and within the recognized administrative region of Judea, situates the birth within a historically plausible and theologically coherent context. Genealogical verification, social recognition, and legal registration all contribute to the historical credibility of the event. The historical framework also includes socio-religious observances. Families in Bethlehem and surrounding regions participated in temple rituals, synagogue worship, and festival observances, integrating genealogical and religious life. The Davidic line, represented by Joseph and Mary, maintained adherence to these practices, ensuring the preservation of covenantal obligations. The birth of Jesus within this context demonstrates continuity of lineage, observance of law, and alignment with socio-religious expectations of the period. The timing of the birth, during the final years of Herod the Great's reign, situates Jesus within a period of political consolidation, social stratification, and religious expectation. Herod's administration, Roman oversight, and local governance structures provide a verifiable historical backdrop for the event. The presence of Joseph and Mary in Bethlehem, the legal and biological lineage of Jesus, and the socio-religious structures of Judea together create a historically coherent framework for the birth, integrating genealogy, prophecy, and documented historical practice. Bethlehem's population, primarily composed of agrarian families, facilitated the maintenance of genealogical records and social recognition. Temple officials, local elders, and community networks verified lineage for purposes of inheritance, legal recognition, and social cohesion. Joseph and Mary's compliance with these structures ensures historical accuracy and verifiability of Jesus' Davidic ancestry. The town's location, economy, and social composition provide additional context, situating the birth within historically realistic and socially coherent conditions. The convergence of genealogical lines, legal recognition, and socio-religious practice at Bethlehem establishes the foundation for the historical and theological significance of Jesus' birth. The integration of Davidic descent, compliance with Roman administrative requirements, and participation in Judean socio-religious structures situates the event within an empirically verifiable context. Genealogical verification through ancestral towns, legal documentation, and community recognition ensures continuity from the patriarchs to the 1st century AD, providing historical and covenantal coherence. The genealogical narrative of Jesus, encompassing Abraham to David, David to the Babylonian exile, post-exilic restoration, and culminating in the convergence of Joseph and Mary, demonstrates both historical continuity and theological significance. This final segment situates the cumulative lineage of Jesus within a broader biblical, historical, and socio-religious framework, highlighting the preservation of covenantal promises, the integration of legal and biological descent, and the continuity of ancestral identity across centuries. The theological import of this genealogy lies in its demonstration of divine providence, covenantal fidelity, and the fulfillment of messianic expectation, while the pastoral dimension underscores its relevance for understanding Jesus' identity in historical and spiritual terms. From a historical perspective, the genealogical continuity preserved across generations reflects the careful maintenance of lineage within Israelite society. Families of Davidic and Abrahamic descent were responsible for preserving ancestral memory, recording births and deaths, and ensuring legal recognition of inheritance and covenantal rights. This process involved temple registries, synagogue oversight, and communal validation, particularly during periods of displacement and foreign governance. The continuity of these records is verifiable in the context of post-exilic Judea, where Persian, Hellenistic, and Roman administrative structures intersected with Jewish religious practices, providing mechanisms for the preservation and recognition of genealogical integrity. The lineage of Jesus, as documented in Matthew and Luke, integrates both legal and biological dimensions of descent. Joseph's line, through Solomon, provides legal legitimacy, establishing a direct claim to the Davidic throne and fulfilling covenantal requirements articulated in the Hebrew Scriptures. Mary's biological lineage, traced through Nathan, ensures continuity of blood descent from David while connecting Jesus to humanity through Adam. The convergence of these two lines illustrates a dual framework of legitimacy: legal, royal inheritance, and biological continuity, each validated through historical, social, and religious mechanisms. This dual structure situates Jesus as both Messiah and representative of humanity, integrating historical and theological dimensions. Covenantal continuity is central to understanding the significance of the genealogy. The promise to Abraham that all nations would be blessed through his descendants is historically and theologically sustained through successive generations, from Isaac, Jacob, and Judah to David, Solomon, and post-exilic descendants. Each generational link, verified within socio-religious contexts, preserves the historical plausibility and covenantal intent of the lineage. This continuity emphasizes the long-term unfolding of divine purpose, situating Jesus as the culmination of millennia of genealogical, social, and religious development. The genealogy also reflects the historical resilience of Israelite identity in the face of exile, foreign domination, and cultural assimilation. During the Babylonian exile, the Davidic line persisted through descendants such as Jeconiah, Shealtiel, and Zerubbabel. The post-exilic period saw the restoration of Jerusalem, the rebuilding of the temple, and the continuation of covenantal practice under Persian oversight. These historical developments ensured the preservation of ancestral lineage, social recognition, and religious legitimacy, providing a verifiable framework for the emergence of Jesus within first-century Judea. The historical mechanisms of continuity, including temple records, genealogical documentation, and communal oversight, demonstrate the integration of human action with covenantal fidelity. From a pastoral perspective, the genealogy of Jesus conveys principles of divine providence and faithfulness. The inclusion of both prominent and ordinary figures, such as kings, post-exilic leaders, and ordinary citizens, illustrates that covenantal purpose operates across all strata of society. The careful preservation of lineage, even amidst political upheaval, social displacement, and historical contingencies, demonstrates the consistent unfolding of divine intention. Pastoral interpretation emphasizes that the historical continuity of Jesus' ancestry reflects divine guidance, ensuring that messianic expectation was fulfilled according to established promise. The legal and biological convergence represented in Joseph and Mary highlights the theological principle of fulfillment of prophecy. Jesus' descent from David through both lines validates his messianic credentials according to scriptural stipulations, while his universal connection to humanity through Adam situates him within the broader context of human history. This dual legitimacy fulfills scriptural expectation and establishes a credible historical framework, reinforcing both theological and pastoral interpretations. The convergence underscores that historical verification, social recognition, and covenantal continuity operate in tandem to affirm the identity of the Messiah. Sociopolitical context also reinforces the historical validity of the genealogy. Roman governance, local Herodian authority, and census practices provide a framework in which legal and genealogical claims could be formally recognized. Nazareth and Bethlehem functioned as administrative and social centers, integrating genealogical verification with civic oversight and religious observance. Families of Davidic descent, including Joseph and Mary, maintain social and legal recognition through adherence to these structures. The intersection of governance, law, and religious practice ensures the plausibility of the genealogical record and situates Jesus' birth within a verifiable historical context. The theological significance of the lineage extends to the inclusivity of Jesus' mission. By tracing descent from Adam, Luke emphasizes the universality of Jesus' human ancestry, situating the Messiah within the entirety of humanity while maintaining specific covenantal continuity through Abraham and David. This dual focus integrates historical specificity with universal theological relevance. Pastoral interpretation emphasizes that Jesus' genealogical identity embodies both particularity as the fulfillment of Jewish covenantal promise and universality as the descendant of all humanity. Genealogical continuity is further contextualized through historical periods, including patriarchal settlement in Canaan, Egyptian sojourns, Israelite tribal formation, monarchy, exile, and post-exilic restoration. Each period provided socio-political and religious mechanisms for the preservation of lineage, including inheritance laws, temple registration, and community recognition. Historical records, including both biblical narrative and archaeological corroboration, situate these lineages within plausible chronological frameworks, providing empirical support for the continuity of Davidic and Abrahamic descent. The pastoral interpretation also draws attention to the diversity within the genealogical record. The inclusion of figures such as Tamar, Rahab, Ruth, and others reflects the integration of non-Israelite and socially marginalized individuals into the covenantal line. This diversity illustrates the breadth of divine providence and the inclusive nature of messianic fulfillment. Historically, these inclusions are consistent with intermarriage practices, social integration, and regional interactions in Canaanite, Israelite, and post-exilic society. Theologically, they underscore the principle that divine purpose operates within complex human history, including both elite and ordinary figures. From a historical perspective, the genealogical record demonstrates the maintenance of social order, religious practice, and legal verification across centuries. Temple oversight, synagogue affiliation, and community recognition function to preserve lineage integrity, particularly during periods of foreign domination and socio-political disruption. These mechanisms provided continuity of inheritance, observance of covenantal law, and verification of messianic legitimacy. The convergence of Joseph and Mary's lineages represents the historical culmination of these preservation mechanisms, situating Jesus within both verifiable and covenantally significant ancestry. The integration of legal, biological, historical, and theological dimensions in the genealogy illustrates the interplay between human documentation and divine providence. Joseph's legal descent ensures compliance with covenantal and scriptural stipulations for kingship, while Mary's biological descent preserves direct Davidic inheritance and universal human connection. Historical plausibility is reinforced through socio-political structures, administrative practices, and religious observance. Pastoral interpretation emphasizes that the careful preservation of lineage across centuries manifests a providential framework in which human and divine agency intersect. The cumulative significance of the genealogy demonstrates continuity across temporal, spatial, and cultural boundaries. From Abraham to David, from David to the exile, post-exilic restoration, and ultimately the convergence in Joseph and Mary, the lineage preserves covenantal promise, historical plausibility, and theological coherence. Genealogical preservation integrates legal verification, biological descent, social recognition, and religious observance, providing a historically grounded framework for understanding the identity of Jesus. Pastoral reflection underscores that the lineage exemplifies divine fidelity, continuity of promise, and the fulfillment of scriptural expectation. This genealogical narrative situates Jesus as the culmination of millennia of human and divine interaction. Historical records, socio-religious practices, and administrative structures demonstrate continuity and verifiability, while theological interpretation affirms covenantal fulfillment and messianic identity. The dual emphasis on legal and biological lineage ensures both royal legitimacy and universal human connection, integrating historical accuracy with pastoral insight. The convergence of genealogical, historical, and theological dimensions provides a comprehensive framework for understanding Jesus' identity, role, and significance within the continuity of biblical history. The final reflection emphasizes that the genealogical record of Jesus serves as both historical documentation and theological testimony. Each generation contributes to the preservation of lineage, the verification of covenantal promise, and the integration of socio-political and religious practices. The meticulous continuity from Adam to Abraham, from David to the Babylonian exile, through post-exilic restoration, and culminating in Joseph and Mary, illustrates the coherence of biblical history, the plausibility of genealogical transmission, and the fulfillment of prophetic expectation. This continuity reinforces the historical and theological legitimacy of Jesus' identity as Messiah, descendant of David, child of Abraham, and universal representative of humanity.